The dark truth inside Apple's mega factory in China is something most people will never hear about. Up to 450,000 people live and work inside a single-walled complex in Shenzhen, a place the workers themselves call Foxconn City. That's more people than the entire city of New Orleans, all crammed inside 1.16 square miles. You heard that right, one address. More people than a major American city. And what happens inside those walls? That's what this video's about. Let's start at the gates. Imagine you just landed in Shenzhen, China. You are standing outside a set of gates, 7 toll booth lanes, armed guards. You cannot get in without scanning your ID. Delivery trucks get fingerprint checked before they are allowed through. You would think you are entering a military base. You are not. You are entering a factory. But calling it a factory is like calling the ocean a puddle. This place has 15 separate factory buildings. It has its own hospitals, banks, and fire department, Olympic-sized swimming pools, fast food restaurants, an internal television network that broadcasts only inside the walls. And it has its own chicken farms, because the cafeterias need so much meat that buying from the outside world is not efficient enough. This is Foxconn City. And it exists for one reason: to build your iPhone. Over 300,000 workers live inside these walls at any given time. Most of them are migrants, young men and women, 18 to 24 years old, who traveled hundreds of miles from poor farming villages just to get a job here. They sleep 7 to a room in high-rise dormitories. They eat in the campus cafeteria. And day after day, shift after shift, they do one thing. They work. Workers who live here rarely see the outside world during peak season. Their entire universe, eating, sleeping, working, fits inside these walls. Some go months without leaving. One analyst who visited described it like this: a massive college campus where half the population of San Francisco lives, works, and never leaves. Never leaves. That detail sits differently once you know what is really happening inside those walls. And that starts with understanding what these workers are actually asked to do. Picture this. You wake up at 5 in the morning. You put on a uniform. You walk to a windowless room that smells of chlorine. You sit down at a conveyor belt. And then you do one thing. One single thing. For the next 10 hours. That is what building your iPhone looks like from the inside. There is a worker. We'll call him Hunter. His job on the iPhone assembly line was specific. He picked up the phone's rear cover. He picked up a tiny charging cable. He scanned both QR codes. He peeled the adhesive backing. He tightened 2 screws. He put the phone on the belt. Then he did it again. He had 60 seconds to complete each cycle. Over a 10-hour shift, his daily target was 600 iPhones, 1,200 screws, every single day. Same motion, same 60 seconds. Repeat. If he needed to use the bathroom, he had to make up the lost time when he got back. Workers are forbidden to talk during shifts. There are reports of employees standing for so long that their legs go numb. Some have fainted at their stations, not from heat, from the relentless mechanical repetition of doing the exact same movement every 60 seconds for 10 hours day after day. One young woman named Chen, a college student who took a factory job during the holidays, described her days like this. Every day she applied more than 4,000 stickers by hand onto iPad screens. 4,000 by hand. 60 hours a week. She said she almost felt like an animal. She was a biology student who wanted to be a scientist. There is an old saying that circulates inside the factories. Workers pass it around like a dark joke. They use women as men and men as machines. That is not an exaggeration. That is the system working exactly as designed. Apple's entire production model runs on just-in-time manufacturing. iPhones aren't stockpiled. They're built as you order them. The moment a new model drops, the pressure on those assembly lines becomes almost inhuman. Supervisors monitor every station from a computer screen, fall behind, and you get publicly humiliated in front of the entire line. Because at Foxconn, humiliation is a management tool. The most recent investigations, as recently as 2025, found most workers clocking between 60 and 75 hours a week, well above China's own legal limit, well above Apple's self-imposed 60-hour cap. Apple's own cap, which Apple admitted was being broken consistently. If the people making your phone cannot keep up with the pace of production, what does that do to a human being over time? Because what happened next at Foxconn was not just burnout. It was something far darker than that. 2010. That's the year the world briefly opened its eyes. It started in January. A 19-year-old worker fell from a building at the Longhua complex, ruled a suicide, then another in February, March, April, then May, when in a single month, 7 young workers attempted to take their own lives. 6 of them succeeded. By the end of that year, 14 people were dead. 18 had tried. Every single one of them jumped. These weren't random tragedies. They were young migrant workers, 18 to 24 years old, who had traveled hundreds of miles from poor farming villages to build iPhones. And one by one, they chose to end their lives rather than continue. The media erupted. 20 Chinese universities produced an 83-page report on Foxconn. Their conclusion was not gentle. They called it a labor camp. Interviews with 1,800 workers across 12 facilities found illegal overtime, unreported accidents, and what they described as inhumane and abusive management. A labor camp. Building your iPhone. For the first 2.5 months, while 6 of those 14 people were already dead, Foxconn's official response to the press was no comment. When they finally did respond, Foxconn's chief executive officer flew in on his private jet and told reporters the factory was not a blood and sweat operation. Apple said it was deeply concerned. Tim Cook flew out to see it for himself. The world waited for real change. What they got instead was nets. Foxconn installed large mesh safety nets around the dormitory buildings to catch anyone who jumped. They brought in Buddhist monks for prayer sessions. They hired 70 psychiatrists. And then, this is the part that should make your stomach turn. They made every new employee sign a pledge, a no suicide pledge. The document stated that if a worker took their own life, the company would not be held responsible and could not be sued. These were the actual words. The company's reputation would not be ruined, and its operation would remain stable. They asked grieving, exhausted, desperate young people to sign away their right to die with accountability. Only after public outrage did Foxconn pull it back, but they did not pull back the nets. Investigators who visited the Longhua complex in recent years have still spotted them, wrapped around stairwells and hanging from dormitory buildings, because the nets were never about solving the problem. In the years that followed, suicides did not stop. A 31-year-old night shift worker died in 2016. In early 2012, 150 workers at Foxconn's Wuhan facility climbed onto a factory roof and threatened mass suicide to protest working conditions and unpaid wages. They had to be talked down by government officials. One worker, who had been at Foxconn for years when investigators finally got inside, said something that has never left the people who heard it. He said that it would not be Foxconn without people dying. Every year, people kill themselves. It is a normal thing. A normal thing. That is what this system had done to these human beings. It had made dying feel ordinary. But the suicides were only one layer. Underneath was a financial reality that explained everything. And those numbers are even harder to look at. Let's talk about money. Because once you see these numbers, you can't unsee them. A Foxconn assembly line worker earns roughly $2.76 to $3.63 an hour. Their base monthly salary works out to roughly $275 to $300 before deductions. After taxes, pension contributions, and mandatory fees, some workers take home as little as $200 a month. $200 a month to build one of the most profitable products ever made. The iPhone sells for anywhere between $799 and $1,500. Apple's profit margin on premium models hovers around 50%. hundreds of dollars of pure profit per phone. So how much goes to the person who actually built it? The total labor cost to assemble a single iPhone at Foxconn is estimated at around $40. You heard that right, $40. Out of a phone that retails for over $1,000. The person who tightened 1,200 screws in a 10-hour shift made a contribution that was a fraction of that, a few dollars per phone. Apple made over $200 billion in iPhone revenue in a single year. To put this in perspective, Apple could double what it pays Foxconn for assembly, doubling it entirely, and still make enormous profits on every iPhone sold. The math is not close. It is not even in the same ballpark. But wait, it gets worse. After the suicides shook the world, Foxconn raised wages. The world exhaled. What the headlines did not mention was what happened at the exact same time. Foxconn raised production quotas by 20 to 25%. Wages went up 9%. Quotas went up 25%. Workers were paid slightly more to work significantly harder. The math did not get better. It got worse. 2/3 of workers surveyed in Foxconn's own audited facilities said their take-home pay did not meet their basic needs. Not luxuries, basic needs. Food, rent, survival. So they worked overtime, enormous amounts. Investigators found workers clocking between 80 and 100 overtime hours every month. Chinese law caps overtime at 36 hours a month. These workers were doing nearly 3 times the legal limit. And here is the detail that reveals everything. Overtime pay was only calculated in 30-minute increments. Work 29 extra minutes and you get nothing. The system was engineered down to the minute to extract maximum labor for minimum cost. This is not a bug in the system. This is the system. But the money story does not capture everything. Because inside those walls, the problem was not just what workers were being paid, it was who was being sent in to replace them and how young they were. Most people who cover this story stop at the wages and the suicides. They do not go looking for what is underneath. But underneath is something that should make every parent watching this feel sick. When the suicide crisis of 2010 created a labor shortage, when workers started walking out, quitting, fleeing, the company needed bodies on the assembly line fast. New iPhones were coming. The conveyor belts could not stop, so they turned to the schools. Vocational schools across China began funneling their students directly into Foxconn factories. Not as a choice, as a requirement. Students studying journalism, law, English, tourism, food science, none of it mattered. If your school said you were going to Foxconn, you were going to Foxconn. And if you refused, you would not graduate. Some were threatened with expulsion. Teachers were stationed inside the factories, not to educate but to monitor attendance and make sure students showed up for their shifts. One student said it plainly, "We must go. If we do not, they will not give us a graduation diploma or school credit." This was the deal. Your future for their production quota. This was not just Foxconn acting alone. The Chinese government was complicit. When labor shortages hit after the suicides, provincial officials gave vocational schools 9 days' notice and directed them to send students to fill the gap. The schools complied because Foxconn had become too economically important to the region to say no. Local governments were competing to attract Foxconn facilities to their provinces. They were not going to let labor complaints get in the way. And it gets worse. Investigators discovered some of these interns were not even 16 years old. Foxconn itself eventually admitted to employing interns as young as 14 at some of its facilities. 14-year-old children working overnight shifts on iPhone assembly lines. One 14-year-old boy, investigators gave him the alias Xiao Wang, was doing transport work during night shifts that ran from 7:40 in the evening until the work was done. No fixed end time. When he fell ill after consecutive nights and asked his teacher for sick leave, the request was denied. He missed shifts. He was fired, and when a classmate asked what would happen when Xiao Wang went back to school, the teacher said he would be kicked out, fired from a factory at 14, expelled from school as a result. For building iPhones, At its peak, Foxconn's internship operation held 180,000 student interns company-wide. Investigators concluded that Foxconn was systematically abusing programs from over 200 vocational schools across southern China. Apple knew. Apple's own investigators found high school students working illegal overtime to assemble the iPhone X as far back as 2017. Specialists were sent to fix it. The next launch came. The pressure built. The interns came back. Because the system that creates this problem is the same system that profits from it. And despite all of it being documented, the wages, the suicides, the teenagers on the night shift, Apple kept publishing reports every year saying things were improving. The audits were real. The reports were real. But what those reports found and what was actually happening were two very different things. Every year, Apple publishes its Supplier Responsibility Report. Thorough, detailed, charts and statistics and language about human dignity. Hundreds of audits across the supply chain, worker interviews, payroll reviews, factory inspections. And every year, the report says things are getting better. But here is what you need to understand about how these audits actually work. The audits are announced in advance. The factory knows the auditors are coming. That means time to clean up the floors, adjust the timesheets, coach workers on what to say. Researchers found that factories maintain two sets of records, clean versions shown to auditors and real versions used every other day of the year. One study analyzing thousands of audits across 66 countries found factories employ consultancies specifically to help them pass inspections, to falsify documents, to coach workers to lie, and to hide anyone who might expose violations. And the moment the auditors leave, the factory goes back to exactly what it was doing before. In 2014, the BBC's investigative program Panorama sent undercover reporters into Pegatron, Apple's second-largest Chinese supplier. What they found contradicted nearly every claim in Apple's most recent report. Workers falling asleep during 12-hour shifts. One reporter worked 18 consecutive days without a day off. Unpaid meetings after shifts. Dormitory rooms crammed with 12 people. Apple's response was deeply offensive. Could not be further from the truth. No company does more. But Apple's own report that same year admitted to finding 700 violations across its supplier network. 700, and framed it as a year of progress. It goes deeper. When the Fair Labor Association, the body Apple hired to investigate Foxconn, sent its president to survey the facility, he declared the facilities were first class and that Foxconn was really not a sweatshop. This was the same facility where more than a dozen workers had jumped to their deaths just 2 years earlier and where 3 workers had been killed in a factory explosion the year before. First class. The FLA was partly funded by the companies it was supposed to be holding accountable. The auditor was being paid by the company being audited. Investigators who work in this space have a name for it. Audit theater, the performance of accountability without the substance. The corrective action plan gets filed. The follow-up confirms compliance. And then, quietly, after the cameras leave and the next iPhone launch approaches, the 60-hour weeks come back. The interns come back. The unpaid overtime comes back. And this cycle repeated. Investigation, outrage, promises, compliance theater, new iPhone, repeat. Every 2 years, like clockwork, a new investigation would surface the same violations: excessive overtime, unpaid hours, student interns on night shifts, and Apple would respond with the same language: concerned, investigating, committed to improvement. The words never changed, neither did the conditions, because the economic pressure that creates these conditions never goes away. At some point, the question stops being, did Apple know? Of course they knew. They found it in their own audits. They published corrective action plans and watched it happen again with the next product cycle. The real question is this: if Apple has hundreds of billions of dollars in cash reserves, profit margins the envy of every company on earth, and full knowledge of what is happening, what is actually stopping them from fixing it? The answer is not found inside the factory walls. It is found in the relationship between Apple, China, and the kind of power that makes accountability almost impossible. Now you know everything that happens inside those walls. The 60-second assembly cycles, the teenagers on the night shift, the suicide nets still hanging from dormitory buildings, the audits that find 700 violations and call it progress, the wages that do not cover basic needs, the quotas that went up every time the pay did. But there is one final layer, the layer that explains why, after all of it, almost nothing has fundamentally changed. It comes down to one sentence Tim Cook said out loud in public: "There is no supply chain in the world more critical to us than China. China is that sentence." The most valuable company in human history publicly admitted it cannot function without China, without Foxconn, without those walls, without those workers. In 2024 alone, Tim Cook flew to China twice. He met with government ministers. He pledged to increase investment. Over the past 5 years, Apple has invested $20 billion in Chinese manufacturing. $20 billion in the same country where its workers earn less than $3 an hour. China holds leverage over Apple that no regulator, journalist, or labor rights group can match. An iPhone contains over 2,700 individual components. The vast majority come from suppliers within a 2-hour truck drive of the Foxconn facilities. That ecosystem took decades to build, and it cannot be replicated overnight. Moving even 15% of assembly to India is described by analysts as a decade-long project. Apple is not just a company doing business in China. Apple is a hostage to its own supply chain, and Beijing knows it. When tariffs threatened to land on consumer electronics, it was Tim Cook, not a diplomat and not a senator, who flew to Washington and personally lobbied for exemptions. He got them. The argument was simple and devastating. If you make it too expensive to build iPhones in China, the price goes up for every American who owns one. So the politicians backed off. This is the geopolitical shield that protects the system inside those walls. Apple is too important to the United States to be forced out of China, and too important to China to be pushed around by Beijing. It exists in a space between two superpowers where no one has the leverage to force it to be better. Except Apple itself. And Apple has made its choice, not through villainous boardroom speeches, but through 1,000 smaller ones, to prioritize margin over wages, speed over safety, growth over dignity, to publish a report every year instead of paying workers enough to live on, to send investigators to factories that already knew they were coming. The workers inside those walls do not have a union with real power. They do not have a government that will fight for them. They do not have a platform or a press conference. What they have is the line in front of them, the next phone, the next 60 seconds, and the knowledge that if they fall behind, someone else will take their place. Here is the dark truth this video promised you. It is not that Apple is uniquely evil. Other companies do this too. The electronics industry runs on this system. What makes Apple different? What makes this story so hard to stomach is the gap between the story Apple tells and the reality inside those walls. Apple sells you the most beautiful, most aspirational consumer product ever made. The idea that technology elevates human beings, that design matters, that things should just work. And then it builds that product in a place where a 17-year-old girl describes her days feeling like an animal, where a 14-year-old boy works overnight shifts and gets fired when he gets sick, where workers once jumped from buildings so fast that the company installed nets to catch them and then asked the survivors to sign a form promising it would not happen again. A man who had worked those assembly lines for years looked at an investigator and said, "It would not be Foxconn without people dying. Every year. It is a normal thing." That phone in your pocket took 400 steps and 400 people to build. The dark truth is not hidden in some leaked document or buried government report. It is in that sentence. Every year, a normal thing. And the next iPhone is already being assembled.